my first lunch meeting, and it was with someone who I was just meeting from this organization I'm working with. And we actually had a conversation that didn't have a purpose, that just went. Like one of those conversations that I realized with COVID and doing everything virtually, like I only meet with people if it's for a reason, if it's, to get something done, a work meeting or something like that. And I haven't had a conversation except maybe, once in a while, on a walk with my husband that just meandered. It was so wonderful. It's so wonderful. And so I thought, let's make this just a real conversation and see what we get out of it together, because this topic is so rich, and we all, I think, touch it from different places. So what we're going to do today this is one of two. Nick's doing one later today with Bob, who comes from a different organization. And what we're going to do is talk about program that Trevor Comyn here in the UK launched with his organization. Now, Trevor leads leadership development with a law firm in the UK. It sounds like it's a rather large law firm, 1,000 folks, 140 leaders. And his overall intention is to turn partners into leaders. And what we're going to do is talk about the vertical development program that he launched there, and how it went and what made it work and what he learned, and give us a chance to ask questions and share a bit about what we are discovering about this field of vertical development and how to best to bring it to organizations. So if you have questions, I think we're going to start with me pretty much interviewing Trevor and learning more about the program and giving him a chance to unpack it for us. And then we'll open it up for discussion. And I think we can take questions both through the chat, as well as, if you raise your hand in the Zoom, or even if you raise your hand in a screen, I might see you, and we can just go around that way and keep it somewhat informal. Okay.
That's good.
So on that note, let's open up. Those of you who don't know me, just 20 seconds. I'm Jan Rybeck. I've been a coach, leadership development, organizational professional for about 30 years. I've been a master coach here outside DC. I've been working in the vertical development space since I think 2000, since when I met Suzanne Cook-Reuter and trained with her to both score and coach using the map. And ever since then, I kept thinking there must be a better way. There must be an easier way. There must be a way to make this more accessible and actually saleable for leaders to really get it. And the field has grown up since then. And I think we're finding ways to do just that. So let's hear from you, Trevor. Starting just a little bit about anything more you want to say about yourself and the work you're doing there and how you came to this.
Well, thank you, Jan, and thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to share what we've been up to, but very conscious that this is even your use of the word program, Jan, fills me with slight horror because I'm not sure it is a program. It's still kind of just emerging and just kind of sort of morphing. But background, I suppose, relevant is I never used to use the word leadership development until a couple of years, or until I came across adult development theory and leadership and vertical development, because I didn't feel I knew anything about leadership development. And occasionally I'd go into business schools and I'd kind of like see programs from other law firms that were, I go, it doesn't really look like a leadership program to me, but fair enough. And I've been in the firm I'm with now for 15 years, and I've got to know a lot of people. I think that's important background. So it's quite it's 1,000 people, but it's a small firm of 140 partners, 500 lawyers and business support. And so I know that well. And the background really was to my journey, which was only sort of 2.5, 3 years old, is our managing partner, who's incredibly bright, corporate lawyer, hugely driven, fiercely intelligent, memory like an elephant. She said, we'll be doing lots of good. We're very a people-centric firm. Said, we've been doing a lot of good stuff on lawyer development, career development, business service development. We're not doing enough with our partners. We need to do more to help our partners develop. And my instinctive response is, well, I don't know how to do that. And to be honest, in our very small parochial world of law firms in the UK, I didn't know of any other law firm that was doing anything that wasn't more than, a program here or a session there, or everyone's doing good stuff. But in terms of developing the whole partnership, I didn't really know how to start there. So that's where we started, and that's been my journey. That's how I came to vertical development, and that's how we started, Jan. But that's a bit of background.
Yeah, and so what was your first introduction then to vertical development? Where did you start with it?
Well, my first introduction was I did a systemic team coaching course with the Academy of Executive Coaches in the UK. Fantastic course. Peter Hawkins, if you know of him, was involved in it, and he introduced Bill Talbot's action logics on that course. And at the time, I didn't understand them. I read the book. I didn't understand that. Spoke to my colleague Rachel, who I worked very closely with. She didn't understand it either, and we dismissed the whole thing. Thought it was a load of rubbish. Not a load of rubbish, but we just didn't understand it. And then we came back to it, and we thought there's something in this. And we happen to know someone who did who does the global leadership profile, sort of the Bill Talbot version of the questionnaire. And we had ourselves assessed. Which was helpful, and sort of got our heads around it. And then in this sort of picking up the other side of the story, and I'd said to my managing partner, I don't know the answer. I think we're going to have to work it out ourselves if we're going to do this properly. So we convened. We asked for volunteers from the partnership, and we got 10 partners in all. Who volunteered to be part of this, what we call the Partner Development Steering Group, and it was 50% women and 50% men, which was obviously atypical of the general partnership, which of course is 28% women and the rest men. And we started off with a very simple agenda of trying to work out why we needed to do partner development, which wasn't a straightforward question. What that might look like, how we might do it. And in one of those sessions, when we sort of first started, in the first few sessions, I flashed up the Bill Talbot model of vertical leadership or adult development. And in a law firm setting, Bill's model works really well because young lawyers come into a law firm as diplomats. They try and work out how things happen. They want to learn their craft, so they become experts, and they spend a lot of time in expertise, and many of them never leave that. Then if some of them think, well, actually, I can't, there's only so much I can do myself. It's better if I got a team to organize this, so they can move into achieving. And then some, not many, think about, well, perhaps the way we do law is pretty antiquated, and perhaps we need to change it, and move into redefining. And some think, well, actually, there's a whole systemic issue here around social justice or whatever it might be. We need to change the system. So it lends itself very well to a law firm culture.
Their trajectory. Path.
Yeah, it kind of mirrors their career structure, and they can see. Well, and in this particular example, Claire, the managing partner, pointed at this slide and said, "That's it. That's my problem," by which she meant, and she is quite post-conventional. By that she meant, I've got so many partners who are experts who just don't get it.
Yes.
And we'd had a conversation about another project where there were some partners who just weren't with the program. And you say, well, why can't they just get it? And so, but when she saw the slide of Bill's level, she went, I now see why they can't get it.
Yes.
they're stuck in expert.
It's a mindset.
Maybe, yeah. So anyway, that's where we started.
Huh. It's so interesting. It's like 10 years of experience or doing the same thing for 10 years. You know, you have to think about, how do we really develop? So can you share a bit more about what this, you said it's morphing, but it's not exactly a program. What does it look like? What did you do? How did you bring vertical in to this law firm?
Well, the vertical from then on sort of has underpinned how we've thought about it, but hasn't been very overt and still isn't. Only becoming slightly more so now. But going back to what we said is, we with this group of partners, we and using the systemic team coaching work which was very helpful, challenging these questions of why, what, and how, and the answers. The why we came to was complexity, that partners needed to be able to handle a more complex world. The what was quite was needed to know more about leadership, but the how was the bit which I think shifted things, which is partners said, well, they want to learn. We want to learn together as partners. We want to work in small groups, because actually part of this was we've really enjoyed this partner development steering group, a group of 10 of us, and we really enjoyed, and we've done some developmental work within the group. We've really enjoyed this, just being with each other and learning. So that was the proposition that the partners, put to the rest of the partners, and basically said, do you want to sign up? And so the first iteration of the program has been a very simple 5 to 6 partners meeting together to discuss a topic. And initially, the 10 members of the partner development steering group were the facilitators. They held the space for those groups. And just going back to the business school example, it's often, and apologies to anyone who's from a business school, but we used to send our partners to business school, but it was like sending them on a sort of jet pilot's course when they still hadn't really learned how to take a plane off the runway. You're giving them rocket fuel, whereas our partners can quite happily sit down with one page on the 5 dysfunctions of a team and find that on team dynamics, and find that incredibly helpful. So one of the things we learned was you don't need very much content at all. Much of it was sharing common experiences and helping each other think through, and creating those social bonds. So, with hindsight rather than foresight, it created a lot of psychological safety, and it also socialized, if that's the right word, personal learning and personal development, which is not something that most law firm partners do or prioritize because they're so busy in the rest of their world.
Well, it sounds like in some ways you busted out of the expert culture in doing that to shift more into a achiever, even redefining culture of learning, a safe space for learning where people can say, I don't know, and be curious. That's right.
And yeah, exactly. It's a classic of, oh, it's great. We've all got, we've got similar problems. Who knew? Yeah. We spend our whole time just talking. We can, partners. I know my partners really well. I talk to them about technical legal issues all the time, but I never talk about these kind of things with them.
So was there any element to that was particularly, as we might call now, vertical? Is there anything you did intentional with that, other than create a space, safe space to have the conversation?
Well, I think what we did. Well, I think one of the things people talk about in vertical is meeting people where they're at. And as I say, most of this is from hindsight, not foresight. But I think we met people where they were at, which was, and the foresight bit was, we worked. So the partners we were working with, they did little focus groups with groups of partners. So we were working. The system was helping generate this program, and the partners who'd been on the partner development steering group were absolutely passionate about it. So one of the partners, when we sort of launched this as a partner day, afterwards came up and said, "See, Trevor, I signed up for this thing, but I've no idea what it is. But everyone seems so kind of enthusiastic. I just thought I should get on board, kind of thing." So yes, I mean, that's why I say it's not really a program, and it still is slightly emergent, because we are trying to keep this sense of the partners owning their own program rather than us, and it's quite a temptation to sort of want to take it over and push it further. But to some extent, I think one of the principles, is meeting people where they are and taking them on the journey with you, rather than to be too far out ahead, I suppose.
Yeah. I'm intrigued because I don't know about other people on this call, but most leaders, particularly like partners in a firm, are so darn busy and so wrapped up with getting through the day to have that level of opening and intrigue and to show up to something. It's like I started the call, right, talking about having a conversation that didn't go anywhere, to sign up for something where you didn't have the objectives laid out up front and you're going to come out with this and this is why we're making this, but to sign up for something that didn't have that, to tell you why it would be worth your time, is really intriguing to me. I don't know about other people, but I find that unusual in organizations. Do you have a sense of what that was about with your firm? Maybe what the conditions were, or?
Yeah, well, so the conditions, as ever, are really important, and they're the normal, things people point to in change programs. So, really good leaders in our senior partner and managing partner, in the sense that they are intensely competitive. But are intensely people-centric and ethical and want to do the right thing. So they have this sort of combination of drive and relational and empathy, and so they're fantastic people to work with. Yeah. I said I've been in the firm 15 years. We sort of run in with Claire. This very she's very challenging, but we've run in each other in various topics over various things over various years, and we trust each other, and there is a degree of trust there, which. I have a little story about, and I should just say that the firm itself is very people-centric, always has been. Certainly is, and does, unlike many law firms, is much more people-centric. But yes, I mean, when we were sort of halfway through this sort of forming the program, because I'd said at the beginning, along with Rachel, my colleague, we said, we don't know what the answer is. We are genuinely bringing this group together to look at the why, the what, the how. And we had a sort of in those days when you went for a sort of 2-day workshop and you had an overnight, which even but Claire sort of sidled up to me on the way to dinner, and she said, Trevor, I'm beginning to believe that you really do have no idea what we're going to do. And I said, yep, that's right. But my take on, sometimes I tell people that and they're absolutely horrified, but for Claire, I think it was okay, now this gets really interesting. For her, it was kind of like, I'm now intrigued. I'm not just going to get given a bullet point answer.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And there's this element of faith that I'm hearing through this through line, and so you must have a good bit of cred.
So there's a lot of
organization that would let you run with it.
A lot of things to come together. Yeah. And it is an organisation which is pretty stable. People don't move around much, so most of us have known each other for quite a long time. So that's one of the enabling factors.
So I'm curious, and we have a question here about stages. So did you use any of the different? I know you use Talbot's stage framework. Did you go into the action logics? Did you go into them specifically in working in this program?
Well, so what we've done since is introduced version 2, which revolves around the leadership circle profile in terms of an instrument to raise awareness. So in version 2, we've now moved people into triads, working on their leadership circle profiles and being more overt about leadership development. But that said, we have done some workshops around vertical leadership using the CCL cards. If people are familiar with the transformation cards, I think they're called. And I think I mean, a little story I have around that, which I thought was interesting, is that, we did sort of a classic, I suppose, the Cynefin model in the good old days when you could put a rope on the floor and people could stand in the various quadrants, and all the partners said no. In the complicated bit, they all said, "Oh, this is great. It's what we get paid for. This is lovely." And then the complex bit, they're all like, yeah, this is the people stuff, isn't it? This is the complicated stuff, complex stuff. And then we did the transformation cards. But one partner said at the end of it, which I thought was interesting, given that partners in a law firm have a career as a partner for 20 or 30 years sometimes, he said, "This gives me hope," which I thought was really interesting, this idea that there is somewhere to go, because sometimes I think, in a law firm partner, you can just think like, the clock literally gets reset every year and off you go again with your billing targets, your time targets, and your legal work. But that was for us quite interesting, this idea. Actually, there is much more demand for development amongst these partners than one commonly assumes. I commonly assumed.
Yeah, I love that. It's really opening up the aperture to assumptions, and it brings up the question, at least for me, about how sometimes our professions can really limit us, what they require, and we don't realize how much more is there under the surface just asking to be let out. That's really, really interesting. Sarah's put the link for the transformation cards in the chat, by the way. Thank you, Sarah. And we can talk a little bit more about those later if anyone wants to know more about them. So can you say a little bit more about how you actually used some of these tools, like the LCP and transformation cards, as well as you said you set up these triads. Was there any structure to the triads or guidance given to them?
Yeah, so we've done some leadership circle profile debriefs. Then we've taken groups and created triads from the people who've done the debriefs. Then we run a get to know each other session, a deeper dive into their LCP programs, and then quite often an immunity to change kind of sort of session. So we've been running them with each triad, and then we're kind of like moving the triads into sort of inquiry groups, really, and what most of them want to do is spend one triad on each person. So you come with a presenting problem, and the group helps them. And we are now in the room. I mean, before we were, I say we, Rachel, myself, my colleague Rachel are now in the room. But the value. I mean, the managing partner. So what partners typically do, and going to your point, is they typically skid into these sessions, saying, "I'm so busy, I'm so busy, I'm so busy," and you ask, "Have you got time for this? Are you okay? Time for this?" And go, "Oh no. I want to be here. It's the rest of the stuff I'd like to get rid of."
Isn't that interesting?
And because I think they value the connection, and they value the ability to think. And so, I mean, we tend to do things quite slowly, but I mean, we are assumptions and just sort of challenging assumptions, and that sort of LCP limiting beliefs and assumptions model works well. I mean, and a nice example was the other week, 3 partners, including, in fact, the managing partner who's in it. But one partner is just complaining about being so busy, team demands, massive client piece of work, couldn't see a way out of it. Her life was being literally ruined by this. The other 2 partners have dived in technical problems, junior project manager, perhaps X could help, all the rest of it. And then we asked the question about, what needs to shift in you, or what's the assumption you're holding, that makes this scenario sustainable. And suddenly this partner said, "Well, I need to get rid of my client partnerships, all these."
Oops, I think you're muted.
Okay.
Trevor? Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah, there was that. But it was a break. But in terms of, if people want to ask, the value outcome, or what's the return on investment for that 90 minutes? This partner, I think, went from an utterly unsustainable scenario where she had too many client partnerships, too many team members, this very complex matter, she decided by the end of it, through the inquiry process, that she needed to give away some of her client partnerships, even though she was scared of doing so, because if she did so, would she have any work to come back to when this big matter was over, and would the firm sack her? But when we examined these assumptions, that's never happened before. It's so unlikely. It was no. So the payback is she's got a more sustainable work-life balance. She's going to develop junior partners by giving them her client partnerships. That the whole thing is a complete win-win, and it took 90 minutes to unpack that, whereas she's been dealing with it for the last 2 months and couldn't see her way out of it. So
thank you. That's such a great example. I'm curious because, I know a lot of us have probably done triads and peer learning circles and group coaching. And there's always the question, I don't know about you folks, but I always have the question of, we'll have a big epiphany after the 90 minutes. And then I wonder what happens when they leave. And if their peers actually hold them accountable the way I imagine it would be nice if they did, when they catch them, catch them in the act of saying yes to something they probably should say no to. And do they pull them aside and say, dude, remember what you're committed to? So I'm just curious, did you see any, and since you're there in the organization, did you see any any continuation of the learning into the workplace?
Yeah, and that's one of the, that's a challenge of being kind of sort of developing leaders and being part of the system as well. But I mean, at the moment, I would say that some of the epiphanies have been such that they have been followed through. So so one of the epiphanies that a number of partners have had is quite similar to the one just described, which is you've got client demands, people demands, all these demands. I'm the only one who can. I have to flex, and suddenly people are going like, no, I don't. I can give this up, and someone else can do it. So a number of people have just said, no, I'm going to focus on this, I'm going to prioritize on this rather than trying to do everything. Yeah. So I think those more sort of structural events have been more. There's when people are actually doing something, but they can actually know what the action is. That they can say, "So I'm giving that up. Can you take it on?" Definitely seeing that flowing through. I agree. I think it's as ever, there's more to be done on holding people account to what they say in the triads, especially when I'm in some of these sessions and then I see them in meetings as well. So, but yeah, so but it is happening. But again, I think it's, we made the point, for these law firm partners, they spent more than 10,000 hours becoming law firm partners. They've spent, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, and we're spending 90 minutes on becoming a leader. So again, I think one's got to be slight, and I'm under no pressure, which for better or worse, to kind of like prove results, because my stakeholders are doing the program. They're happy with the results that. But I think there's also that kind of realism around how hard some of this is to shift.
Yeah, no, I think that's so helpful with this field, because it's not like you can move to transforming with 3 90-minute group coaching sessions. It's when you say becoming a leader, what's that picture? You have a sense of what the goal was, what the aspiration was with leader and that capacity?
I think it's. In the law firm, our strategy is now about being leader. But leadership is all over it. But it's quite easy to be it was quite easy to be a law firm partner, have some clients, make some money, have a small team around you, and just life was pretty straightforward, really. But if new entrants into law, AI, technology, client demands. In the last 5 years, before COVID, but the last 5 years, you really saw a steep escalation. I mean, some of it's worn away a little bit, but when people were really talking about AI, taking over law, there were a number of partners were just saying, God, I'm just so terrified. I haven't got a career. My career won't see me out. And certainly terrified. I don't see how I'm getting, the junior lawyers, I don't see what future they have. I think some of that's gone away, but certainly the sense that there is a seismic change in law, and just doing what you used to do is not enough was part of that. So how do you lead how do you stay ahead of the, I mean, from their point of view, how do you stay ahead of the curve and ahead of the competition?
Yeah, kind of push your own assumptions and think about what's possible.
Mm.
And I'm also thinking structurally or organizationally, have there been cultural organizational shifts as a result of this that you've seen?
Yeah, so we have so we've also been doing some work. Well, so we have practice area heads. They're called NSL leaders in our National Service Line leaders. So they manage groups of partners and lawyers, maybe 100 partners and lawyers. Over the years, they worked quite autonomously. They've had their own little fiefdoms. There hasn't been fiefdoms. It's not been really sided work. But the point, I suppose, is they haven't worked closely together. They've turned up for management type meetings to talk about profits and salaries and headcount and that kind of stuff, and then they go off and do their own thing. So off the back of this thinking, and especially with the managing partner saying that we need to get these mainly guys thinking at a high level, we are now doing deliberately developmental sessions with them. So they still have the management meetings, but we're now looking at reward and recognition, for example, as a developmental exercise. We're not saying, we're saying the outcomes from these conversations will feed into how we decide stuff, but you're not being tasked with coming up with the answer to this problem. You're tasked with thinking it through and seeing what new insights and you can come with, and that's been actually really helpful.
Isn't that great? So you've really brought that into being a desired competency, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and some of those NSL leaders are on our partner. We're on the original partner development steering group, and so as ever, you've got some of them who kind of like sort of know they're being developed and are keen to be developed. And you've got some of them who just turn up and don't know they're being developed. They've just been asked to come. So you've got a little bit of. One partner said, I didn't realize that was a development group. I thought we were talking about reward and recognition kind of. So there is, again,
Intertwined.
Yeah. So, I mean, law firm partners, by and large, don't like being taught. So they tend, because then they move into expert mode. But they quite like getting involved in stuff and fixing things. But if you can, so it's about framing the conversations, I think, rather than, we don't do much teaching. It's more around framing. So we've introduced polarity thinking, but only as a way of looking at the problem. We haven't taught polarity thinking. We've just said, well, perhaps is this a helpful way of looking at it, kind of thing.
Oh, aren't you sneaky, Trevor? So, what I really like about what you're saying is, it's sort of like one of our little bumper stickers for the work we're doing with VMI, is there should be no difference between development and getting the work done.
Yeah.
And really integrating it. It's really interesting. So I have a lot more questions, but I don't want to hog you. I'm thinking we have a lot of folks who have questions to bring. And we do have one question here that I think is a really good one. Thanks, Mayna, is it? Yes. Do you want to ask the question, or you want me to share what you wrote?
Oh, I can ask it without a problem. Yep. So I'm just going to read it. Actually, I'm curious about concrete practices that could be recommended to leaders in organizations that are stabilized in a more expert action logic and maybe more resistant to collaborative frameworks. And I'm curious about how we can impact these people in order to move a team and an organizational culture that is not already fertile for a more redefining practices. So how can we impact these leaders to bring a team, a group, and an organizational culture toward a more achiever or early redefining action logic on a larger scale?
I have ideas about that, but I don't want to answer them yet. I want to see what other people have to say. It sounds, Trevor, like your group was already pretty ripe for this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, I don't want to be but within my world, there are some experts who are locked into expertise, and they're almost untouchable in terms, they are such craftsmen of law. All the classic stuff you read about, they only take feedback from lawyers they regard as better lawyers than them. They don't want to be involved in all this other stuff. They just want to do law. And to some extent, taking the 80-20 position, I'm quite happy. I'm quite happy to find the willing rather than the trying to persuade the unwilling. But I think what happens certainly by the partnership level, and I'm conscious when I'm working at the top of the hierarchy, but it's when you become partner that life suddenly becomes really complex, and it becomes really hard to manage, and you begin to realize that all that legal training is not actually helping you very much to become a partner. So it's the challenge, the developmental challenge they're faced, and kind of like, does this kind of stuff help? By and large, it does. So they're open to it, but so that'd be my response, Janet.
Yeah, I totally. I'm going to build on that, because if you, the unfortunate thing about the term expert is that we conflate it with this idea of people being an expert in the field versus an expert mindset or an expert action logic. And the whole idea about these stages is not necessarily what you do as much as the frame and the way of being you bring to it. And it's really more about ego psychology, ego constructs, right? So the expert mindset is one where you feel safe. I almost think of it more as like our relationship to certainty each stage. And the expert is all about a sense of certainty based on what I know and what I do. And so what I have found is when you bring exercises, like exactly what Trevor's talking about, that help people get grounded in that certainty, and then what do they see for sure, and what does that mean for what they need to do? So in the expert mindset, you still need a really good hunk of certainty. You just don't quite have the ego structure to be really geeky about it, to be able to step into even the uncertainty of saying, I'm going to find out from other people what's going to make us effective. And so to Trevor's point is the question, well, would we rather be right or would we rather be effective? Becomes a really helpful question to bring into these triads, to these learning circles, or even just a workshop. And what does effectiveness look like? And what might we see that's happening out there? And how might we better meet that need? And what you often find when you bring that question in, inevitably, is you're talking about emotional and social intelligence at the expert into achiever space. So any of these practices that all of us on this call know about from the world of coaching and leadership development and emotional and social intelligence, finding ways to bring those, but not in a classroom, in real life coaching, real life situations where people have to actually crash and burn with it and feel and find their way, like real heat experiences where they have to go in and lead a team that isn't about expertise, but is about getting buy-in and communicating a vision towards a goal.
Can I give a short, just a little story, just maybe follow up on that, Jan, with that, because I think systemic team coaching, I think team coaching is critical personally.
Yes.
And just a small little story is we're looking at our purpose as an organisation, and perhaps radically, we're trying to look at what it would mean to be a purposeful organisation rather than having a purpose. And that's obviously quite a complex thing to handle. And there's a small group of us looking at it and working with it, and it is difficult. But there was this moment when 3 lawyers got together, without anyone else there, and they suddenly panicked. And this email came back saying, with endless bullet points as to their inability to handle the uncertainty of what purposeful meant, rather than deciding we had a purpose. And then we got back into the main group, and they were kind of like reassured. But I thought it was a lovely example about how once they got together at an expert level, they really fell apart because there was a complete lack of certainty. And indeed, the final point of the email was, can we get an expert in to tell us how to do this? But anyway, so that's just a little bit of a fallback for those three lawyers there.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great example.
I mean, if you just think about with this stuff, if you bring this question of certainty and what's the relationship to certainty and what do people need to be able to be with slightly less certainty, that can often bring them to an edge and an action. What do they need? Does it need to be safe to fail? How do you make it safe to fail? Well, maybe that comes from the top. Maybe that comes from a different reward structure. So those are just questions to think about. Jeff has another great question here. Jeff, do you want to ask it or do you want me to just read it? You're on mute, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to ask it. With all this mutual development, it sounds like it's mutual development very much. I'm wondering, how much have you had to modify the organizational infrastructure to cope with people who can manage with less certainty and therefore work differently?
It's a great question.
Yeah, I suppose the answer to that is that not much. I mean, so we haven't changed much. I mean, various parts of the organisation in the business services side are moving slightly more towards a kind of like a sort of team model, decentralised teams rather than hierarchy. But the lawyer part of the business remains quite hierarchical. However, it's also very organic. So my sense of a partnership is actually like a brain, because you've got all these partners who are, and our partnership is pretty equity partnership, who are all equal owners in the business, and they're out there constantly responding. So a lot of these things ripple through, because a lot of what happens in a law firm is not based on the hierarchy or the lines of reporting anyway. It's based on who knows who and who's had a chat with who. And there was a wonderful report done by one of the business schools in England about the 2008 crash, about how professional service firms responded in that moment. And it was all, the board wasn't summoned, and it was all these informal networks. So I think you're seeing more and more of the skills and the kind of like, well, okay, we can do this. We can, but no, some of these partners are saying, yeah, well, I can get a group of partners together to work collaboratively to co-create this solution now. Whereas before I might have thought I have to do it by myself, or before I go to the meeting, I have to have the answer. No, so it's more organic, I think, rather than the organizational structure itself changing.
I don't know that I ever would have thought the word co-create would land in a law firm. That's my own bias and assumptions coming through, but wow.
Well, I suppose that's playing with I said that the senior partner and managing partner, while quite post-conventional and sort of, are also very competitive. So kind of like so they're now part of them are kind of like listening to some of this language, and they want to be at the leading edge of what they now understand to be leadership development. So they want to be using this language, because there's part of them is that achiever competitiveness. They want to. So
well, you can tell them we've given them their secret decoder rings now. They've made it. They've made it to the end.
Well, one of our principles for hybrid working going forward is to generate colliding perspectives, which some partners are very unhappy about, but the senior partner really believes in it, so that's great.
Yeah, maybe we should write a paper about them and publish it and make them feel like they're at the top.
Oh, they'd love it.
That would be great. What other questions do you have for Trevor, or just in general about bringing vertical leadership development into organizations? And feel free to just raise your hand or speak up or put it in the chat. Yeah, Maya?
Yeah, I know I already asked the question. I don't want to take up the space, but I wonder if there is any existing management tool maybe that is available according to a vertical development framework for managers to adjust their interventions with the people in their team according to what they see in the behaviors. I don't know.
What do you mean, like management tool, like an instrument, assessment, or a?
Yeah. I was Jeff's question brought that to me. I wonder if let's say I have a manager that is in a very achiever mode, and he's working with people that are experts and achiever, and he sees someone that is growing into a more achiever or redefining mode. Is there tools like grids according to maturity framework, that like language that the manager can use in order to have a more precise intervention, or
to help them know what the steps are, what the practice help them go into that stage? That's a really good question. I have some thoughts, but before I bring them up, I want to see if anyone else has some thoughts about that. Trevor?
Yeah, I'd like to share, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might help Maina to answer the question that you've asked. And that is, of course, understanding the organization that we're working with, and then what is the actual ultimate goal in terms of the vision of where they want to take their leaders. Okay? And so let me give this a real life example. Like Trevor and no doubt yourself, Jan, and others here, I've been on the journey of leadership for quite a number of years, working with St. John Whitmore Performance Consultants International, with Nick Petrie, the CC in Singapore. And my current situation is I'm working with a conglomerate organization. They have 17 different companies under the mother company. And the goal was to take all the senior directors and leaders on a leadership journey using international tools, international mindsets, for mainly Cambodian people. Okay, so a lot of cross-cultural information going on here. So, having worked on Action Inquiry and with Dave Snowden from the Cynefin Institute, for sense making and other things, I'm thinking to myself, well, too many leadership programs and too many leadership ideas of what leaders look like, they're too similar and they're not hitting the mark.
Yeah.
They are repeating the same thing over and over and again. And so I sat down over the last couple of years and I've designed a program. I designed a leadership excellence program for this company, but also in Myanmar and Malaysia and Singapore as well. Ideally, it's a 2-year program split into 4 phases, but it can be a 1-year program split into 4-year phases. And we take them on a journey. And those 4 phases start with leading self. And during that phase of leading yourself, we use the different tools and the different frameworks for them to actually get to grips with exactly who they are, understanding their egos, understanding their strengths, their weaknesses, their way of thinking. And we start with a leadership assessment, okay, a 360 degree. And being a Marshall Goldsmith's certified coach, I also do a GLOF, a Global Leader of the Future assessment on these guys. And what this does, it opens them up because they have to give permission for certain people to provide them with the feedback that they need in order to feed forward, in order to grow, in order to develop. And this is done at the very, very beginning. And then at that stage, we worked out, well, what do we need to do? We need to, it's not just, we don't want to just do a leadership program where we're pumping knowledge and skills. No, we want to actually get them to change their way of thinking. So hence, obviously, the vertical development came to this. How do we do that? How do we do that with the coaching? How do we do that with the heat experiences? How do we do that with the creating the multiple perspectives? How do we change their thinking so that they can actually challenge what they've already learned in the past and then reapply it in a new and different way for the future? And then, of course, on top of this, with the pandemic, we've had to go agile as well. So how do we create the high-performance teams how do we create the conditions for a high-performance team to become self-administering, self-managing? How do we create the leadership skills of those leaders to allow that to happen? The culture has to change as well. So all this had to come into the design stage. Okay? So we've got for the heat experiences, we have ongoing projects that for each of the phases, they work in small groups, complete a project which is based around the subjects that they are learning and stretching themselves to do, and then keeping coaching diaries and personal journals throughout the whole journey. So we can see at any one time exactly what's going on, what they're struggling with, where they're changing, where they're really starting to excel. And usually, if it's, let's say, the 6 month rather than a 1 year for each of the phases, 3 months rather than the 6 months for each phase, we set them certain tasks that they have to complete. We do business simulations so that they're real life experiential activities along the way. So it encompasses the whole aspect of this horizontal development and, of course, the vertical development to create those conditions. And for me, the tools that you're talking about, Amy, is the understanding of where the leaders are now, where they need to go, and then how we're going to get them from there. It doesn't matter whether they're lawyers, it doesn't matter whether they're CFOs or CEOs. Leaders are leaders, okay? Or, and so the 4 phases, as I said, leading self, then leading others, and then leading the organization, and finally, leading in society. Okay, you're not just leading for yourself, you're leading for the greater good of others. And so this is a journey, not a destination.
Trevor, I'm going to have to.
Along the way,
Trevor, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second because we only have a few minutes left and we've got some other questions coming up.
Okay, no, that's it. Yep.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you. A lot in there. And I'm sure people can follow up with you directly if they want to learn more about that program. But that was really very thorough, comprehensive, and certainly that gap. Thank you. We had another question here about was the VMI used? Thank you. Hi, Hansi. Good to see you or see your name again. I don't believe the VMI was used with you, Trevor, because we didn't have the VMI yet.
No.
And just to give you a little bit of sense, but this might also speak to your question, Maina, about tools. And what the VMI is the Vertical Mindset Indicator, for those who don't know, is a version of the GLP, Global Leader Profile, or the MAP, which are 2 very robust assessments that are been used for many, many years to score vertical development, to be integrated into programs, and to help identify that gap about what's needed and where am I at in terms of mindset or action logics. The VMI is a short version that's actually scored using AI that Nick Petrie, Carl Edwards, and myself have launched over the past year, and is really hitting a mark with folks because it's the first, we call it an indicator, we don't call it an assessment. And the reason that is because it's literally 1/4 of what the full assessment is. And even though it's been quite accurate for most people, we still want people to think just in terms of indicator, not assessment, because that invites them to find their own place within the model, rather than having an assessment or an expert come in and say, this is where you are. It gives them a chance to actually find out for themselves, which diminishes the hierarchical nature of the framework. Because if that just is obvious, this is where I land, and that's where I land. That's the way it is. And it also helps make it, back to your point, both Trevors, really land in the context. What does this actually mean to me? And we encourage folks to hold stage lightly while taking their growth and their development and their context, to your point, Trevor, seriously. And so we combine this indicator, which is a 6 or 9 sentence stem completion done online, You combine it with a short digital coaching process that allows you as a leader to unpack what does this actually mean. So it's your own mini inquiry process to come to, well, what's my edge here? And what might I do? And then you have the option of doing a coaching session if you want to go deeper. And we've managed to get these coaching sessions down to a half an hour of targeted call it laser coaching that, number one, allows it to be affordable. And number two, allows you to really go deep really quickly. And the coaching that's been done this past year using that has just been incredibly powerful for folks that way. And the other thing about this is that, Sergey, and just was Singer's note here. The other thing about that speaks to what we're talking about here is that it's really easy to integrate this kind of approach to any type of leadership development program, because it can take on the flavor. We can frame it. We can partner and work with it to frame it. So the tool does not become the focus. When you pay $1,000 for a global lead GLP or a map or even a leadership circle profile is what it costs by the time you've done it and you've done the debrief. When you pay that, the assessment becomes the focus. And what we want the focus to be is the individual and that journey about where they're at, what's becoming more clear to them. So you meet them where they're at, the way Trevor was talking about. And so we're experimenting with lots of different folks right now to find different ways to bring it into different leadership programs, and especially working with teams. Because it, once again, it's scalable. So everyone in the team can use it, and it drives the team conversation. We've just piloted it for the first time with a team this week. Actually, I just had the meeting with the team, and it cracked them wide open and gave them stuff to work with. So that's what the VMI, the Vertical Mindset Indicator, is about. And if you want to learn more, just reach out to me or Nick or Sarah, who's on the call here. Just find us, and we can tell you more about that. And of course, there's many other ways to integrate components to create a vertical program. The main idea here, what I'm hearing from all of this, is how do you go deep? How do you provide that depth that allows people to really crack open and explore the edge, what isn't the habitual ways of thinking, doing, being, reacting, interacting? How do you help them provide the conditions and the tools to help them step beyond what they know, and meet this complex world that we're all in with a bit more verve, interest, guidance? Any other questions, final questions or thoughts before we wrap up?
I might make an observation that it's a point of reference. I've been studying adult development for about 10 years now, but especially applying it in the context of project management. So working with teams, but not necessarily referencing the models per se, because I think one of the, we're speaking as practitioners here. So we're going to recognize this, that our greatest tool is ourselves.
Yes.
Our ability to be present in the circumstance and to listen and see, because so much of adult development is about pushing the edge of the subject-object dichotomy that Keegan talks about, of being able to see what they can't see because of the boundaries of where they are. And really being able to be present to that. Because I think one of the biggest challenges I've seen is recognizing that in every organization, we are operating with people who are operating at all the different levels, all the different action logics, and they're all needed for their own purpose in space, and that's okay. So it's not just about developing people for the purpose of getting them to higher stages of performance. that's all great, but it's doing it in the context of where people are.
Totally.
And so I just wanted to throw that out as an observation, because this is critical. I mean, I'm listening to the themes on this call. I'm looking forward to the recording, because the essential elements of coping and dealing with the complexity of this day and age is so universally critical for all of us.
Yeah.
And yet we do it together. So those who are operating at a higher stage have to be operating at that stage to support those who need the support to be able to be lifted up in their own way and moving in it, but doing it together in a co-creative way. So just want to throw that out.
Thank you. Scott, what a great way to wrap up. That's beautiful. I have a personal soapbox, which is I think every practitioner needs to have some deepening awareness about their own mindset and what they bring to the work. I don't think we're going to get any pushback on that from this group. But really appreciate what you say. And, one of the things we talk about here is that vertical mindset, it's a map, not a yardstick. How do you use it to say, I am here. Where do I want to go? What's that going to take? Trevor, thank you so much for bringing your experiences to us and enlightening us.
Well, I hope it was helpful. And just one final point is I'm still in the organization. I think that's something we didn't get onto, but people inside and outside is, I think is the more people in the organizations are learning about vertical development. I think it's a critical part of the overall approach.
Well, great. Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us wherever you are. I hope you have a good morning, afternoon, evening. And please be in touch. Reach out.